Good evening. Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. I'm Craig Trulio. With us tonight is Father Dr. Jacob Joseph. And I don't usually have such great guest on, and we're humbled to have his presence tonight. So I'm going to give an introduction. Aboona Jacob Joseph is a priest of the Malankara Archdiocese, the Syrian Orthodox Church, and professor at St. Athanasius College, and expert in Orthodox mission theology, Patristic and Contextual theology, Syriac theology, Indian theology, and missionary history. He's doing a first in a few parts of Indian Christian history, starting with the basis of history and Christianity in India, that being the 1st to the 4th centuries. Father Jacob, it's great to have you on this evening. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to be together to explore the nuances of Indian Christianity. Thank you.
Well, this is a topic on this channel I've spoken about in the past a few times that's extremely important to me, because in India, the gospel went to India before many other parts of the Christian world. People think of Great Britain and whatnot, and there's hagiographies and mythology based upon, Joseph and Arimathea going there. But cold, hard facts, secular history, the hagiographies, everything aligns about how ancient the Christian religion is in India. And this is something that's very underappreciated, because people presume that Christianity in India is some sort of missionary religion, that they're bringing the white man's religion to India, where it's really the opposite. Indians had it before most of Western Europe. So right. This is something I find to be absolutely fascinating, because also India has peculiar in an interesting way, has a very interesting history as how Christianity got there and how it developed. And Father Jacob is one of the foremost authorities on this subject, and I know you've done lectures. I've seen you on YouTube. You've been also recently on the channel Urho. Is there any particular books or research that you're coming out with now or had recently that you think is relevant to this topic?
First of all, again, at the outset, let me thank you, Craig Trulio, for this wonderful opportunity to have a very interesting conversation, particularly about one of the ancient Christian traits that we are talking about today. It's a window of opportunity for even other Christian traditions to look into the history of Christianity in India and also history of Christianity outside. So with regard to this, the introductory words, I just want to give you a few disclaimers before I start my topic. Though I teach history of Christianity in India, I teach mission history of Orthodox churches, and particularly the Oriental Orthodox churches, and also the Patristic literatures, and also looking at how the contextual theologies are taking a new phase of understanding the early Christian theologies, or maybe Patristic theology. I just want to just give you a disclaimer that today we are not going to deep into those kind of methodologies. We are just looking at how, or maybe what is the basic nature of the Indian Christianity as understood by the Indian Christians, not from outsiders. So I just want to give a picture about how we look at, or maybe uncritically, how do we look at the Indian Christianity. So for that reason, I'm very much aware that for the past 300 years, Western Christianity has looked at Indian Christians, particularly in a different lens and different angles. So I'm not going to look at that area today. And that is what I'm just looking forward today, in tune with whatever that topics that I discuss in other places, like even in Urho and other places. But in Urho, I just look at things a bit more critically. But here we are going to have more and a robust understanding of how Indian Christianity, per se, we as the St. Thomas Christians, or maybe even we call it as Syriac Christians, how do we look at our history, our ancient traditions, and without looking at its critical lenses. So whether it is there or it is not there. So that is what my interest is all about today with you, and therefore I think we will have wonderful time to look at the essence of understanding Christianity from the Indian point of view, not from the Western point of view. So, yeah.
And I really look forward to that, because a critical look at history is a big theme on this show, is to look at the sources carefully, not just what people quote snippets, and also to look beneath the surface, because we're not the ancient people. And particularly if I'm studying history in Kerala, I've never been to Kerala, right? Let alone being from Kerala 2,000 years ago, which is neither of us. And so to really fully appreciate historical sources, it requires taking on a very foreign perspective, chronologically, culturally, linguistically. All these things are extremely important. So I really appreciate that you're bringing that to the table. But if you could always plug your books later, we'll have time for plugs later. We can get right into the questions if you like.
Yep.
All right. So go right ahead.
Thank you. So at the outset, I think I would like to just give you a brief perspectives, or maybe narration, historical narration about Indian Christianity.
Sure.
So we do believe very at the very naive way, we think, and also we believe that we are St. Thomas Christians because one of the apostles of Jesus, St. Thomas, came to India in AD 52. And even we are very much clear about the year. Whether there is a historical document or not, we say in AD 52 he came to India, and he preached the gospel of Christ to a certain people who are later converted into Christianity. But in this history, it is very interesting to note that we see that Thomas the Apostle had a great tradition of being with the earliest Christianity in the adjacent community. So these are all very much clear about in the world Christian history. So there are interesting stories behind it, how Thomas the Apostle had to relate with the adjacent community, a community which was much more flourishing in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century in that part of the world. So there are stories with regard to King Akbar and how Jesus had to go there to heal him, and then later he could not go, and then he sends Thomas. And we believe that there are a lot of stories connected to that, and he apparently heals and also do some certain favors to the king, and then continues to do his ministry or maybe missionary journey to India. So possibly this is how we begin with. Thomas came to India, a place called Kodingalur or Kranganur. We call the place's name is you will find in history books, or maybe even in the in the online text you will find Malankara, Maliankara, or many names, but you don't have to worry about it. But he came to one of maybe the tip of Indian peninsula, which is we today called as Kerala. But why do we believe that? So this is something. This picture would give you a very clear understanding of how and when, or maybe how he came to India. Is it logical to think about whether he can come at that point in time to India? So this belief of being him as our patron apostle, I think it is very much rooted in the history, or probably in the liturgical tradition, and even in our in our word mouth traditions, and tradition which are connected to some of the folk songs and various other forms of literatures. So this is very, very, very clear that there is a group of Christian community existed in India from the very first century itself, and which is maybe later part of first century, and that gives us a very solid feel that Christianity in India is, as you said in the introduction, is much older than many of the Christian traditions in the Europe or in the Western world. So I think at the outset, that's what I just wanted to share with you. So this picture that you shows is almost like an old Silk Road route, which we will talk about later. What are the resources through which we can confirm that there was a possibility for Thomas to come to India from Edessa or from the Middle Eastern countries. So this is the first and maybe a general comment that I wanted to make at the very beginning. Yeah. Yeah. So
You brought the soundtrack with you tonight.
I know.
So
yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
But this kind of segues really, which was the first question, which would be starting broadly, the highlights of Indian Christian history in the 1st and 4th centuries. And so from what I am aware, it appears that St. Thomas had 2 missionary journeys. One which would be really modern day Pakistan, the next which would be more in southern India, closer to Kerala. Okay. And what is interesting is that archaeological finds have brought out that the traditional names associated with the king and whereabouts in the first missionary journey have proven to be correct, showing the reliability of the Acts of Thomas, at least pertaining to some of those details. We're yet to get the same level of validation for the claims about the second missionary journey, as far as I am aware, for his second missionary journey. But that being said, there is why I brought up that map. It's so very interesting that there were a plethora of Jewish communities. There were Romans, there were Greeks due to trade. Pretty much the time in which St. Thomas made it to Kerala, the monsoon was first documented. I'm sure it was discovered before that and they understood the right way to sail there, but it was first written down, I think, in 54 AD. So it's all at the right time, if you're looking at just historically in a dispassionate way. So being that a lot of my audience is going to be somewhat unclear, they're going to know St. Thomas went to India because everyone knows that. But do you mind giving us maybe the highlights before we get to the nitty-gritty of how he got to India, what he did, and how Christianity spread there and prospered for the next few centuries? Just the broad highlights.
Before we just get into the broad highlight of this particular narration, I think we must also know about the sources. So mainly what kind of sources what kind of sources that we have. I think one of the sources that you have already highlighted, that what are the geographical and social and even economical or what were the trade relations that we had in those days. So that I will talk about very briefly maybe after the second source I'm talking about. The second source is about Acts of Thomas. Acts of Thomas is a 3rd century, probably a kind of a later part of 2nd or maybe early part of 3rd century Syriac document. Probably a kind of, if I call it as an Edessan writing, which is also about, it narrates about how Thomas came to India. But fortunately or unfortunately, the thesis that is put forward by the Western world, they disclaim or they disagree with all these narrations, and most of these points that we talk about are not fully agreed by the Western world. So therefore, I just want to caution the audience: when you choose a book about history of Christianity, you must know who has written it, what is the intention behind it. And even from within India, we have different kinds of traditions prevail in the early Christian churches. We have denominations, different denominations with different affiliations. Western affiliations and affiliation to Indian indigenous churches, and even affiliation to the Middle Eastern churches. So each text would give you some highlights about their own histories. But no matter what we talk about, the specifics about the history of Saint Thomas, but some of the histories or some of the traits that we have is very much indicative for us to understand how important for us to know about these Christians as an early community. As you know, as I said at the beginning, this community is also known as Nasranis. Nasranis. This is a very common name. If you go to Kerala, people call, "Are you a Nasrani?" Nasrani is a Nazarite, or maybe persons who follow. I'm sorry. The faith, or we call it as Margam. Margam in Malayalam means ways. Margam of Jesus, or the one who follow the Nazarite, Jesus Christ. So this is therefore an important name that is carried in our social life. And the second point is very important to note, that we have certain churches which is claimed to be consecrated or maybe inaugurated or constructed by Saint Thomas, which some of them are still, some of the churches claim their origin from Saint Thomas' time. So which I will explain you later. So apart from the Acts of Thomas, we have yet another reason why we follow these traditions, because of some of the writings that we have, serious writings that we have from the early church fathers. And even starting from Eusebius, or maybe Centerframes, Jerome, and many other, even some of those early fathers have referred to these traditions in India. Now, my point is very simple. Apart from Acts of Thomas, we have traditions, and even some of the word-mouth traditions and maybe folk songs, which explains about the coming of Saint Thomas to India and how he has done his ministry in the Indian peninsula. So, to give more accurate reasons why we have some of the other reasons is the trade routes that we have. The trade routes, major trade routes, where the China or maybe Chinese trade route, we call it as old Silk routes, or maybe, as you said, the monsoon wind trade routes all through sea, and even the Alexandrian Indian trade routes, and even Ethiopian Indian trade routes. And even we had other, early trade routes where people were so much interested in getting the spices from India. So these are all, giving us some reasons why the authenticity of the possibility of one of the disciples to come to India. So these are the possibilities I'm talking about. Now, with regard to the arrival of Saint Thomas, so he comes to India. He comes down to Kodungalur. So I narrate as it is the history. I'm not critically looking at the story. I'm just giving you the story. When he came down to Kodungalur, he visited some of the places, and even some of the places down to Kodungalur, a bit more north to Kodungalur, which is called Paravur, where he found people worshipping in the temples. So those people were called as Brahmins, but which is also very much, contrary to some of the recent researches. But we have to accept the fact that in those days there were Hindu worship. And if the audience know about how the Brahmins, the high caste or higher caste of Hindu religion, comes to southern part of India, which is directly connected to Aryan religion, Aryanism, the one who has come from Persia, those who migrated to India, they were the Aryans, and those who were in India were called Dravidians, Aryans, Dravidians. And then we had, as Craig has rightly pointed out, we had Semitic people as well, including Romans. So this was very much a cluster of people. Probably in today's world, I would say it is just like New York. So people from all over the place, they come together for trade and commerce and various other activities. And interestingly, India was so much welcoming the people to practice their religions as well. They had their own religions, so they could practice. Jews, even after the second temple destruction, or probably second temple time, we have Jews came to India. After the first temple destruction, people had to migrate, and diaspora Jewish community was established in India in a well, or maybe very much in a broader way. And Kerala was one of the major centers where we had a lot of histories about the Jewish community. Now, apart from this community, I'm just getting back to where Thomas came and met the community. Then I wanted to elaborate the community, and that's the reason why I'm coming into that particular point. So sometimes we may confuse that these are the Brahmin communities alone. No, it was not. Recent researchers are giving us very clear picture that the traits of Buddhism, as very much there in the southern part of India in those days, and also Jainism, Buddhism, and even other Dravidian religions were very much present in the southern part of India. And so much so that some scholars would say Brahmins were not a clear and an evident community in there. However, there were a bit of, very small communities were there in the southern part of India. But in St. Thomas's story, we concentrate those community as Brahmins. So the high caste priestly community of Hinduism, and they were practicing their Hindu rituals in one of the temples. So when Thomas came to India, he met these people and they were worshipping in their temple. And the very interesting story is that they were bathing in a pond. And they were just, just throwing the water upside. And then that is the time that Thomas went there, and maybe they met each other. And Thomas challenged them, if your God could do some miracles in this regard, it will be great to understand. Otherwise, I will pray and I will show you some miracles through the God in whom I believe. And then these people were throwing the water up, and the story tells us that Thomas prayed and the water stands still on the air, up in the air. And then these people believed in him and the God in whom he believes. And that is how some of them turned to Christianity, or maybe some of them turned to the belief of St. Thomas. And that is the very first church. It is believed to be, that temple becomes the very first church to Christian tradition in Kerala. And thereafter, he has established almost another 6.5 churches. So these churches, or maybe when we call it a 600 churches, which is spread across the Kerala region. So I just for the information of our audience, I would just name those churches, which I won't be explaining you. One is Kodunallur, the other one is Kollam, second one, the third one is in Niranam, fourth one is in Nilakil, fifth one is Kokmangalam, and the sixth one is North Paravur, which is again Palayur. And finally, the seventh one is called the Half Church. Very interesting story. He has.
I was wondering about 6.5. So.
Fortunately, last year this time I visited that church in Tiruvankor, which is called Thiruvidankor, near Kanyakumari. Now this is situated in the other state, not in Kerala state, Tamil Nadu. It is the border. I mean, it's border of Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And which is named as Half, because there is another tradition that this was that particular temple was under the control of a king called Arachan. Arachan is again half, or maybe there are different traditions on that. But Arapalli, Ara means half, Palli means church, Arapalli is half church. So with these narratives. We have a very prevalent story that Thomas came and established 7.5 churches. And not only that, he erected cross in those days. And that's also debatable whether cross was existed at that point in time. but there are solid, researches brought in saying that yes, there were crosses as a symbol even at the time of Saint Thomas, and then he erected some of the crosses, and which is again later called as Saint Thomas Cross. So, in a broad way, Thomas came to India and he preached the gospel of Christ, and many from the Hindu traditions, converted to Christianity. But in my view, in my research, and even in my reading, I have to add a few more things. That it was not only the Brahmin community, which was a cluster of, as you have rightly pointed out, Jewish, even the Middle Eastern community. They could easily connect with Thomas because their language was almost similar. And at the same time, he came here and he established a church along with a kind of church with, I would always call it as a hybrid community of Semitic, Dravidian, and Aryan community. So all these clusters were there. So this community was existing from the very beginning, and that is what the churches, or maybe the history, the narratives, the very early narratives from the point of view of the Syrian Christians, or maybe the St. Thomas Christians in India.
Now, there's not enough time today to ask all the questions to be asked, but I'm going to try. And so right now, people in India are Syriac Christians, but this is not some sort of recent thing. We have 3rd century sources that talk about, they say Hebrew Gospels of Matthew in India. Mm-hmm. And I would presume most likely it would have been Aramaic. The liturgical language in Kerala is still Syriac, which is Aramaic. Yeah. And I think of this historically as, why were the Jews speaking Aramaic? Aramaic was the lingua franca of that part of, not India, Asia, but if you're thinking the Persian Empire, so it would have been where the Greeks took over, and it would have been the language of trade, because really Alexander the Great came after the Persians, and that's when Greek became bigger. But Aramaic still was this lingua franca. So it makes sense, if you're going to bring the gospel to Kerala, what's the one language they're all going to have? Well, maybe some of the Romans and Greeks would know Greek, but there'd be people from Persia. Probably the language of trade in that area would have been Aramaic. So it makes sense that, well, if you go to the synagogues, to the Jews there, or if you go to the Brahmins there that are merchants, what's the language that you're going to be able to speak to all of them? Aramaic. So it seems to me a very strong connection of this part of India being connected to trade that is probably centuries old due to the Persian Empire, which at that point was collapsed for quite some time. Even Alexander the Great's empire was collapsed. There was in Pakistan a Parthian kingdom that succeeded a Greek kingdom, right? An Indo-Greek kingdom. So Greek never fully took over there. It would have still been Aramaic as his language of trade. So this is me speaking ignorantly. I don't have the DR in front of my name. So I'm curious as to what your perspective on this would be. Would it be fair to say Aramaic would have been a lingua franca for merchants in that part of the world, even as far down south as Kerala?
I think your observation is very correct. There could have been a very popular Aramaic-speaking community in India. But at the same time, I have another thesis. I have a completely different approach to this particular area. One of the probably points that I would always refer to this to explain this part of or maybe this area is that Aramaic. We know that when it has moved its dialect to the adjacent community, even with the 1st century, it has got its Syriac form in the early, or maybe classically Syriac form. We call it as Estangalia, or maybe later East Syriac and then West Syriac, whatever. But how do we connect all these together along with the community that was there in the early church in India, or maybe early Christian community in India? My point is, so this is something very important for me as well as a Syrian Orthodox Christian, and also a person who is much more closer to the or maybe belonged to the Antiochian hierarchy. So if you look at Thomas, as I have already said, Thomas had a very good connection to Edessa, where even in the very first century, the Aramaic has just formulated into a new form of dialect, or maybe what we called as early Syriac form, which has come to India. Therefore, it is a form of Syriac Aramaic is already there in the very beginning. But it gives us more important evidences when we see the Gospel of Matthew, which was there, or maybe some of the evidences that we read from Eusebius, the historian, and the history connected to Pantenius. These are all giving some very clear picture of how this question of the early community and the Syriac, or maybe what we call as Aramaic, is connected. So I have this is my take in the whole process. So if you look at Pantenius' story of Pantenius, where we have a very solid relations that we see with the Antiochian church of that time. So if you see the story of Pantenius and his relation to Serapion, the then Antiochian patriarch, he lived, or his position was AD 191 to 211, where Pantenius and Serapion, the patriarch, were very close in fighting against the Gnosticism, which was prevalent at that point in time. So that is where we see some of the other traits that basically we have a connection to India. That I've gone through one of the books which if you can just get this book, which is Matthew and Margins by Warren Carter. He gives us 16 theses for giving us the right answer to how the Matthean community was a very vibrant community of Aramaic, or maybe a Syriac-speaking Syrian Antiochian community, and how that community is very much connected and also had its deep relation to the Antiochian Christianity, and how Ignatius of Antioch started quoting from Matthew, and how that Matthew has traveled across the world, particularly connecting to the Indian church. So the Warren Carter is not talking about how this is connected to India. But when we read Eusebius, we know that he finds a copy of Matthew in India, but it is definitely connected to Bartholomew. But however, we know that a copy of this Matthew is found in India. So my thesis is that there was a very solid connection between the Antiochian church, or probably the Aramaic-speaking church, connected to Edessa, to India, and it is also revolving with the history and the life of Thomas. And meaning, not just Thomas brought all these stuff, but rather after Thomas, there was a very solid connection continued with traders and the community who began their Christian life in India and connected back to Edessa and also in Antioch, through even the language of Aramaic, or the modern form, or with the later form of Syriac. And therefore, this connection is very important. But even some of the Syrian scholars, they reject it, because they don't want to say that Pantenius came to India, which is the India today, what we see as it is, but it was Ethiopia. Some of the books from our own traditions, we disclaim the reason of being India, called as India by Pantenius or maybe Eusebius at that point in time. But however, I believe that there is a greater connection between this language, liturgy, and the ecclesia of Antioch, Edessa, even Alexandria. Oh, I forgot to mention the name Alexandria because Pantenius. So these four centers, India, Alexandria, Edessa, and Antioch, was in a circle where Christianity grew, hand in hand. And because of the trade route and even the ecclesial connections thereafter, we have every reason why we can say that the Aramaic community or Jewish community and the Syriac community, probably quoting from all these four centers, were connected together and grew together. But at the same time, Indian Christianity had these connections with Antioch, but at the same time, they were growing as a church in India with the auspicious and also the ecclesial, ecclesial relations with all these churches of the other part of the world. So this is my take on that.
Now, before we proceed, you've mentioned this twice, which would be the importance of folk songs in preserving early history. And to be honest, I know nothing about that. So if you don't mind me asking, which ones? What are these folk songs? What language are they in?
There are two major sources that we say that in the olden times we had. One of the folk songs that we talk about is from the very early times, which narrates, which just we call it as folk songs. And in that folk songs, we have stories that are recorded about Jesus, about the coming of Saint Thomas, and all what I have narrated about Saint Thomas is given as songs, which was sung during the time when they meet in the church and even after the churches. But in the 16th century, we called as another document, which is very solid even today, which is called Ramban Pata. Ramban is called monk. Pat means for song. So Ramban Pat, which is sung even today during the time of wedding and other occasions. People on the previous day of the wedding, people all gather together and they recite these songs in the traditional families, and which reverberates the story and the narrations of history of Saint Thomas. So all these songs are part of the, I shouldn't say the daily liturgy, but part of our festive liturgies, are giving these explanations of how Thomas' story is important. However, these are all challenged. Some people say these are all later descriptions of some of the later church leaders. However, we have some of those folk songs written in from the very, very olden times. So the language that the earlier time was not the Malayalam that we talk about, which were Tamil mixed Malayalam, and the language was again called as Pali, another language. So these are some of those references.
Said Bali?
Pali, yeah.
Now that's interesting, because that's the same language the Buddhist monks in India, in Cambodia, that's my wife's country, and none of them know what they're saying. So apparently they what's the deal with Bali then? That it's made it all the way to Cambodia, and that the folk songs would be Bali.
Yeah, see, that's what I said. I don't have any quotes with me now, but I can just give you maybe after some next episode. Maybe I can bring you some of those references. But
Okay.
but these are this also shows that how the early community was very much connected to the Buddhist and even the Aryan and even Jainism and other traditions of that particular point of the southern part of India and even in the other parts of India. So they were just borrowing language and words from each other and constructing their narratives in those days, apart from the other meta narratives that we have as part of the Indian Christian tradition.
Well, yeah, if the songs are in Bali, the one thing I would know immediately is it sounds like at least 700, 800 years old, which would be several hundred years older than, people saying this is something that came in the 16th or 17th centuries. And I'm sure you would wager that means it's much older than that even still. But let's see. And it's great to get lost in the weeds on this. But sadly, Western audience, which is most of my audience, we don't have really good background in much of this. And so we talked about how there's third century sources, particularly the Acts of Thomas. We didn't get into a lot of details about, but I mentioned how in the Acts of Thomas there are some stunningly historically accurate details, which betrays that the author had a good knowledge of that part of the world. Now, how is the archaeological evidence? You speak of the churches and crosses, some arguably as old as the first century. What is our most compelling archaeological evidence that gives us an idea of Christian practice in India in the first few centuries?
When you look at the evidences, archaeological evidences, which is not that solid that we have, apart from a few archaeological evidences that later found as part of our Christian tradition in India. But that is after 4th century, and mostly when you type in, even you Google search the Thomason cross, you will find a cross which is mostly considered to be the cross, Saint Thomas cross, which is again connected to the Nestorian cross, or maybe Persian cross, which was very much prevalent in the Indian Christian tradition in India. So that is one of the most important evidences that we put forward, or Indian Christianity put forward, to have our own history. Not only the tradition that we talked about now, but then after 4th century, we got another history of a twist, that how the Nestorian church is taking over some of the ecclesiastical hierarchies in India. And I think that is another point of reference. But we have an archaeological approach, or maybe evidences, that we see some of the churches with its ancient architecture of Hindu temples. So if you look at the earliest Indian churches, or maybe ancient Indian churches, which has got very much an archaeological architecture of Hindu temples, which is on one way is an amalgamation of Hindu tradition and the Indian Christian tradition. And at the same time, the churches which borrows, as I have already said, that Thomas erected some of the cross, or some cross in India, which is also connected to Indian and Christian tradition, where you find very much different from other Western approach to the image of cross. So you have a cross where you find, probably you can just show, you find a dove coming in representing the Holy Spirit, and down you see again the lotus. It is fixed upon a lotus petal, which is also considered to be a kind of amalgamation, or probably a kind of a cross-cultural approach to the Indian tradition and to the Middle Eastern cultural tradition. So this is one of the most important archaeological evidences that Indian Christianity put forward, to see that how we had our earliest documents that we have, even from the archaeological evidence, that shows Christianity and its reference to the narratives that we have in the Indian context. But apart from most of these narratives, which we call as Sliva, Thomas Sliva. Sliva is also a borrowed word from Syriac, which in Malayalam, when it came to Malayalam, it is called Sliva, and from Sliva. And but we talk about this evidences, not just simply to say how Thomas's tradition is important, but at the same time, we wanted to just highlight the relation between the Church probably I should say East, which is also part of the historical narration of the Indian Church. Indian Church was not always been independent as it is here, but rather it was always connected with the other parts of the history of Christianity. But again, apart from the archaeological evidence, we have certain other linguistic evidences which we normally connect with our local language. So we use some of the words which are very relevant as part of our daily use in the Malayalam words. Which is one is kurbana. Kurbana is korbon, or maybe we call it as Holy Eucharist, which is in Syriac we call it as kurbana. And the second one I said about sliva, which is kurishe, slivo. And then we use another word which is even mostly popular with not only in India, in other parts of other parts of the world, where we call the table of the Lord as thronos. Thronos is a very common word that we use. And if you see the festival seasons, we have a procession. Procession is mostly understood in another word called rasa, which is also from rosso. Rosso is another Syriac word. So my point is very simple. My thesis is that there are some archaeological evidences that is a later part of the invention. But the early part, which is mostly a dark age for us to get some of the close evidence. And this is the reason why even Western historians are not agreeing with some of these traditions. They don't find any archaeological evidences as such. However, in the recent studies in the Musiris or Kodungalur, Kranganur areas where St. Thomas is believed to be arrived at the very first place, there are a lot of archaeological excavations are going on where people try to find some of the earliest identification of parts of the buildings and churches, which dates back almost 1900 years ago. And then you can find even in the website that there are dedicated group of people. They spend time for the archaeological evidences where. That place is called Musiris. Musiris archaeological evidences, or St. Thomas archaeological evidences, or early Syrian communities evidences. All these part of the things that's going on, but not much. But a few. If that is okay with for this short discussion, I believe we can go with much more in the later part of the century, but not with the early 4th centuries.
Let me ask one question, and if you're skeptical about this archaeological evidence, so be it. But how about the tomb of St. Thomas? It's in a Roman Catholic cathedral today. It'd be one of 3 cathedrals which are built, at least allegedly, at where the remains of an apostle are. It's not uncommon that where there are particularly important relics, just like the Holy Sepulchre, the churches over their remains have been rebuilt so many times. It's not like it looks like a time capsule. It just looks like a far more recent church. Do you think that basilica really was built over St. Thomas' remains? And is there anything there of significance that is left? Or is it just a traditional spot which people identify as such?
Thank you, Greg, for this question. I was very much aware when you asked me this question, archaeological evidence, whether I should include the tomb of Thomas, the apostle. So this is also another debatable, issue that we have in with regard to the Saint Thomas tradition. Definitely, it is believed that Saint Thomas died in Mylapore, St. Thomas tomb in Tamil Nadu, because he had an extensive work in India. It is believed that in AD 72, he was killed by some of the religious fundamentalists because of his greater work in that part of Tamil Nadu. not only there, but it was in those days, 2,000 years ago, it was all connected to each other, and it was all ruled by smaller kingdoms of kings. So kings of smaller kingdoms. Now, my point is that this story, or maybe this is very much recorded by some of the liturgical traditions, some of the early fathers, but at the same time, we have a debate whether it is those accounts are true or not. But one of the prevalent stories that we have is that his remainings or relics were moved to Edessa in the 3rd century, which is also written by the main, probably one of the greatest Syriac authors, Saint Ephraim. And with his writings, if you read the very beginning of our letters, or maybe the hymnologies, that we have this particular reference by Saint Ephraim. So he writes, "The evil one wails, where then I can flee from the righteous. I incited death to kill the apostles, as if to escape from their scourges. By their death, more than ever now, I am scourged harshly. The apostle I killed in India, to Edessa before me." So there is a reference to India, to Edessa. "Here is he, and also there. I went there, there he is. Here and there I found him, and I am gloomy. Did that merchant carry the bones? Or perhaps indeed they carried him." So there is another story that there were in those days the church hierarchies from the Edessian community came and took the remainings or relics of Saint Thomas. And another story gives us that the merchants, they took his relics back to Edessa. But whatever be the story, today we see it as a term which is in terms of word to mouth, or maybe historically as a part of our meta narratives. We consider this as part of the an evidence talking about Thomas's relics as part of the evidence of his ministry in India. Many of the secular writers also they also uphold the same value of the relics and the tomb, but at the same time there is a debatable point here. However, if we want to call it as an evidence, archaeological evidence, we don't find the archaeological results of Thomas the Apostle and his remainings by analyzing the relics over there, but even through the meta-narratives, or maybe through the stories and the narratives that the Indian Church put forward, that we believe that it is a part of our history, and therefore it is a strong belief. Even every year, all over, Christians from all over India, or even from other parts of the world, they come and venerate his relics there, or maybe considered to be the tomb where is some of the remainings are there. Where people come and consider to be one of the most important shrines of Saint Thomas. So in that sense, probably you can consider this as another evidence. Probably we should maybe think about whether it should be considered as archaeological evidence, but we can consider this as one of the evidence. It's a strong history, and according to the Syrian history, and even some of the hymns, or maybe the folk songs that is prevailed in among the Syrian Christians, even talk about his tomb, and also the remainings that has come there in Mylapore. But at the same time, we have another belief that it is already taken over, or maybe taken to Edessa. But these two histories are there. It is not contradictory to each other, but it is complementary, and therefore it is very much true that according to the Syriac Christian history, that we strongly believe that Thomas had his ministry and he died over there, and its remainings are there, and therefore we have the tomb, and therefore this history is very much solid for us to prove that the Thomas's ministry was true, and one of the earliest communities existed in India was not a story, but it is a true community.
And it's similar to the biblical story of like Saint Joseph's bones being brought back to Israel. This is not the first time, and Saint Thomas was apostle again, not just to Kerala. We spoke of an earlier missionary journey to what would be present day Pakistan, and if I remember right, there's a far large. I think in modern day Kurdistan, they also believe that the St. Thomas also preached there. So he would have been seen as extremely important in all these different lands. And so they've been vying for his relics, I'm sure, as well. Being that we're on the issue of relics, and I don't know how much more time I have you, so I want to ask this question, which would be, we have the issue of St. Thomas's tomb and his relics, and from sources like St. Ephraim the Syrian, we have very good authorities that speak to him dying in India and his relics being in Edessa and etc. But how about any other saints? Are there any other notable saints that we should be aware of in India between the 1st and 4th centuries? And what is, if there's any veneration of their relics in India?
Unfortunately, for the first 4 centuries, we don't have much, as we always talk about. We don't have many sources to think about that we have some of the other saints existed as such, saints in modern terms. But definitely, every faithful in Christ we consider saints. But then we don't have any particular place other than some of the other tombs that is coming up after 4th century. So, in connection to the life of Indian Church with the Church in the Middle East, we have another 2 saints coming up thereafter, are Sabur and Afroth. Those 2 people also, they came from other outside, and then they died in India, and they consider them as part of Indian Church. And even they came to Kollam, another port city in India, or maybe in Kerala, and their names are venerated, their days of death, or maybe their life is venerated even today. But apart from that, we have not much saints being venerated in the olden times. But today, definitely we trace back the early church fathers as part of the Syriac Orthodox community, and we venerate their names in the Indian church. Like, for example, some of the fathers like Saint Ephraim or maybe even Afrahat, not much, but then we consider, and even the fathers of the common church, we venerate very clearly, even on our feast days. The important point that we focus at this point in time is that the church in India is to be understood much more in a broader way than many of the other churches, which has got a root of a clear historical narratives in terms of its evidence-based narratives. Because Indian church lost its early evidences very clearly, and it's a very clear historic fact that we lost everything after the invasion of the Western missionaries, or maybe Portuguese invasion, politically or religiously. So it's a true fact that we don't have many documented evidence left with us. We have one of the historic point is the coming of the Portuguese church, or maybe Portuguese-based missionaries, and how they have seen the early Christians in India, and how they had difficult times with them to continue their life. But however, it is true that the church had its saints, but we do not know the names. Church had its clear-cut liturgical life. We do not know what kind of liturgy we had in a very clear manner. Probably, some of the theses, some people would like to say that when St. Thomas came to India, he also brought a liturgical text because of the reason that the very first century, when the disciples dispersed after they received the Holy Spirit, they had their first communion together, and they knew that what they are doing during the time of communion. And therefore, even Indian Christianity, Indian Syriac Christianity, we follow the St. James liturgy because of the reason that it is the very oldest one. And there is every reason people believe that even St. Thomas had some of the texture of those liturgy, and he continued with that liturgy in India. And that is the reason why one of the latest, or maybe last century, church historians and a father, his name was Father Placid J. Podipara, he's from the Catholic tradition, and he was asked what kind of a Christianity you define about Christianity. He says it's a very popular quote. He says, Hindu in culture, Christian in religion, and Orient in worship. So this is what he talks about Indian Christianity: Hindu in culture, Christian in religion, and Orient in worship. And if that is true, if Placid J. Podipara is true, these traits are there from the very beginning. And therefore, we do not know any saint's name or their ways of venerating them, but definitely we had these saints because the church had its very early connection to the other parts of the Indian Christendom, as I have already said, Antioch, Alexandria, even Edessa, and India. And they had very much common things to be together, to celebrate together, which we do not know what they did about. And that is what I have to talk about the saints. Apart from Saint Thomas, definitely they venerated from the very early times, and thereafter Sabur and Afroth, two major saints' names that come into the Indian Christian or maybe Syriac Christian tradition, and thereafter we have many. But because we are just coming to this point, maybe then you can add Thomas the Canna. We have not come to that point, and that's why I have not discussed that name. We know that immediately after this historic point from the 4th century, we see the first Syrian migration to India, and with various reasons, where Thomas the Canna from Edessa and 72 families with a group, they came to India along with a bishop and a few priests. And I think the Indian church started venerating those people as their other saints. Like even today, if you come to India, even in Australia, we have Knanaya community, the earliest prates of that community. They venerate Saint Thomas the Canna as their saint. So the first one who came from Edessa in the later part of 4th century. So we have saints, but unfortunately, we do not have any historic evidence of saints, name of saints who are the indigenous saints from that point in time. But probably there could have been many, in my point of view, but we don't have the historic traits or maybe historic narrations of those saints because of the lost nature of our early documents.
Now, my last brief aside on this point would be, you said that the Christians in Kerala are using the liturgy of St. James presently. And my question would be, how do they receive communion? Do they receive communion placed in their mouth, like in the Syrian tradition, like in the Middle East? Or do they receive in the hands, like the document speaks about? Because this would be something, obviously, I'd be totally ignorant of. How in your liturgy do people receive communion?
Probably I have just touched upon those points earlier. How the Indian Church is closely associated with its liturgical life and Oriental worship, and even the ecclesial hierarchy from a very ancient time. But if this is another debatable point, whether these hierarchies were existed even from the very first time, from first centuries. It's debatable, but in my point of view, there was even after the Nicene Council, we see that how India was part of the Antiochian, Antiochian church, and it's a part of expansion. Now, that's not the issue here. Here it's the liturgy. Now, liturgy, we follow the St. James liturgy as part of the Syriac liturgy of the entire church, Syriac Orthodox liturgy of the Universal Syriac Orthodox form. And therefore, we follow even most of the ancient Christian traditions in India, which we normally talk about St. Thomas Christians, which has got various families in today's life. We have Catholic traditions. We have a bit of a combination of Protestant and the Syriac traditions, and even some of the pure Protestant traditions. They all follow the same, most of them, except the Pentecostals. They follow the basic form of the St. James liturgy. So, for which the top ones, we talk about the Orthodox Christianity in India, the Syriac Orthodox Christians in India, which has got two factions. This is we call it as part of the Syriac Orthodox Church, but the Indian traits there. And then we have Marthoma Church, even the Catholic Church. We have the Malankara Catholic Church, which is part of the Syriac Orthodox liturgy and tradition. And we have another church called Tojur Church, and various other traditions who have come. Even recently, we have a new. Earlier, it was called as Pentecostal Church. And just within 1 decade, we have changes of some of the Pentecostal churches into, should I say Pentecostal, but then we call it as evangelical churches. They turn to be more orthodox in nature. They have completely changed their liturgical life and their ecclesial forms and hierarchy, everything into the Orthodox form, and they follow the St. James liturgy now. Whether it is authentic or not, it is another question. But many of the St. Thomas Christians or Syriac Orthodox Christians, or generally called as Syriac Christians, they follow the St. James liturgy as seen in the Universal Syrian Orthodox Church, and they follow the same patterns of receiving the communion, not as the other other ways of receiving it in the hands or whatever, but it is basically the same form that we use.
So it's placed in their mouth.
Yep.
Well, what I find fascinating about that answer is that being that Anglicans, Roman Catholics, both branches of Syrian Orthodox in Kerala, because there's a schism, they all follow the same thing, which seems to betray a origin for the practice preceding all of them.
Yep.
Right, and so this means this was before Portuguese contact. So that's absolutely fascinating.
If I want to just add one more point,
Sure.
One of the points that connects all these Christians, all these different, if you call it as factions or maybe different denominations, we all take St. James liturgy seriously. So that is one of the connecting factors, and that is the reason why we have something very much important to argue with: the connection between Antiochian Church and the Indian Church at large. Okay, thank you. Please go ahead, Craig.
So let me ask this. Now, we spoke about Judaism in India, and we touched on this. And so I know that in India, there's a group of Jews called the Cowachan Jews, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing wrong. Just because I'm half Jewish doesn't mean I know how to pronounce Cowachan or whatever it is. So my question is, were they amongst the first converts of Christianity, or were most of the St. Thomas Christians really converts from native Indians and not the Jewish communities?
Would you please expand your question a bit more?
So there's Cowachan Jews in India. Were they there in the first century? How long were the Cowachan Jews there?
Oh, definitely. They were there in the very first century, and there are historical facts or maybe historical backings for finding their presence in India, even at the time of second temple, Jerusalem temple, and even second part is the destruction of the temple by Nero. the Roman ways of looking at, probably the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. After the destruction of Jerusalem temple, we see that there are a group of people, they have come to India. And when we talk about they came to India, it's mostly in the coastal part of India, and which concentrate in Cochin, what we talk about Cochin or Ernakulam, or what we have even in Kodungalur, all these areas. And therefore, these group of people, the Jews, what we called as the early settlers from the Middle Eastern community or from the Palestinian community, they had a very close contact to India, and therefore every possible aspect for us to believe that they were there even before Christianity. So Jews' evidence in India is not even after Christianity, even before Christianity is there.
Well, and like we were talking about yesterday, how in Acts chapter 15, St. James gives us a rationale why they shouldn't eat blood and different things, because there's Jews in every city in the world, right? Like that's the rationale. We don't want to offend Jews coming to Christianity from every city in the world. So we see that not only referenced in Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, that there was Jews from every city in the world. We see this reference even later. And I just find fascinating that, there's this Jewish community in India, even to the point where we have a picture right there on the screen into the 1800s. You could take pictures of these Jews. They're there. So this was a community that persisted for quite some time. Now, I believe this is going to be my last question for today before I give you some last comments, and we'll take some questions and answers from the audience, which would be, we're talking about the liturgy, and I'm going to pronounce the word wrong, but are there any Malayalam, however you say your language, loan words that have worked their way into the liturgy, or is that language too late of a language, and are there any Bali loan words? Is it just Syrian, or are there native Indian languages that their words have made their way into the Syrian, the Aramaic liturgy?
In our liturgy, probably if you look at our liturgy, most of our liturgical texts are translated from the Syriac original text, whatever that is available, even in our sacramental texts or maybe other festival texts. And therefore, it's a kind of a literal translation to our language called Malayalam. But interestingly, if you look at very seriously, those Malayalam or the translation that we have is completely not. It's something which has got more words that are prevalent or that are there with the higher class or caste language. So it was not a common language as such. Even there is a strong criticism in our churches today that even the translation in our own language, Malayalam, we don't understand. Some of those words we don't understand now because it's hardcore upper class Malayalam that is talking about, and which has directly come from Sanskrit. And so most of the words, if you listen to and take the meaning, it is exactly like what the Hindu words that we have in their liturgy. So in that way, more than Malayalam is taking into the Syriac form, Syriac has taken into a Malayalam form much more deeper way in our Malayalam liturgy, and that is where I've said some of those words which I've already said is from Syriac, Kurbana, Thronos, and Mamodisa. Mamodisa is baptism. So Mamodisa is a very common word, even in our native daily news. Sometimes if it is connected to any church, they don't call it as baptism. There is no such words available in our word. in our local language, but which is directly translated from Syriac as Mamudisa, which has come into Malayalam now, Mamudisa. If somebody wants to refer to the Holy Mass or Holy Eucharist, they call it as Kurbana. In fact, it is a Syriac word. Even in the in our daily news, if something to be referred to as Kurbana, which means it is Holy Eucharist. And they talk about the architecture of the church. I'm sorry. It is all about Matbaha or whatever, the Sliba or whatever. All these words we have taken from Syriac into our Malayalam liturgy. And that is now popularized in our liturgy.
If you need to take a quick water break, go right ahead. So to wrap up the first 4 centuries, it seems to me a good traditional closing of the book would be the arrival of the 72 families from Edessa. And so before they arrived, from the evidence that we do have, which is fairly extensive, we didn't really even talk about all of it today. I think I counted 5 separate 3rd century sources that include secular sources. They're not even Christians, like Porphyry. People know who he is. He's a Neoplatonist. So like even guys like him are talking about Christianity in India. My question to you would be, how far at this point did Christianity spread in India, and how numerous was it? I mean, I know you're not going to know it's 134,012. Like, we're not going to have that exact number, but how numerous was Christianity at this point? Was it really just a religion of a few merchants, or was it now really ingrained at this point in India?
I must confess the fact that the number of Christian group or maybe Christian faithful was not large at that point in time, with various reasons. So there were different reasons. Even today, there are sociological reasons and even economic reasons and social reasons, and those reasons would tell us that the number was not large but very small. Even in 4th century, up to 4th century, very meager, like business people or maybe trade people who come with trade, and some of the migrants, and the one who has or maybe had their possibility to interact with the converted groups. And secondly, I wanted to just give you an emphasis that we should not give a wrong idea that the Indian Christianity up to 4th century looks, or maybe they look like what it is today. You know, what is happening in today. It was not in that way, because the combination of all these cultures, Jewish culture, Roman culture, Buddhist culture, even some of the Aryan culture, all these connected in their Christian approach. There are documents we see that even in the 17th and 18th century, Syrian Christians looked like Brahmins. Even they had long hair in today's times of hair, and they had a thread tied between their body. It is basically a Brahminic identity of Brahmins, and which was more like a Hindu in nature, in culture, and even you wouldn't much differentiate with people on those times. So therefore, the number was very less. And then Christian expansion of evangelism did not take place with another reason. That is probably, whether we like it or not, Christianity from the very ancient time was an upper religion in India. So the kings and other people, they liked them. They gave a lot of privileges to them because they had a Jewish texture, Jewish culture. And they also found that the upper caste Hindus, they could connect with them because they also follow some of the rituals, the purity and pollution, the ritual of purity and pollution, and they had a mind of working for the kings. So some of them became soldiers. So the kings gave them a lot of grants and also presentations and gifts to them, land and other activities, and they got a high social structure and status. Now, If you look at the Indian history, you have the caste system. So the upper caste people, they don't go down and meet with the lower caste people. Probably this is one of the reasons. I'm not saying that this is the only reason, but this is one of the reasons why which we were not, we were not very much careful about evangelizing to the other people or maybe expanding Christianity to the entire land in India, but rather it was becoming more and more kind of an exclusive community. And the third and fourth reason could be because of the story of Saint Thomas, who believed in Christ and finally he was killed by the opponents. People might have had their own personal reasons by which they never would have, openly professed in society saying that they are Christians, because they were, maybe because of that reason, they were frightened by themselves that they might be killed, or maybe they will be attacked by people of the other faith at that point in time. But I'm just guessing some of the reasons. But whatever the reasons, the number was very less. But and that you see even today, Syriac Christianity in number, compared to their origin in India for the past 2,000 years or maybe 2,000 years, is very less as such, because we were never aggressive. We were never aggressive in going ahead with our evangelism, as we see in the Western missionary movements. We try to go along with their traditions and their approaches and their own ways of life. We were never contradictory to the norms of the land. We were always going along with what has happened in the country, and that's the reason why the number was very less. There was very, there is nothing written somewhere. It's all guessing, but the number was very, very less.
And so that would explain why, if there were 72 families, it would have made a notable bump in the community. Because if it wasn't that big, that 72 families, if let's say there are 720 families total, 72 would already be 10%. So that's an interesting reminder you give us, that the fact that they converted people that were, well, let me rephrase it this way. A lot of Christian history is like, right, you convert the king like Constantine, Vladimir in Russia, whomever, you convert the king, then they convert all their subjects,
Yep.
right? So it's almost like you want to convert the high and mighty. Then you go to India, you convert the high and mighty, you convert the Brahmin, right? It just stays among them. It's not going to trickle down. So it's the way it works in India is totally different. So that's very interesting that you bring that up.
Thank you.
Well, Father, do you have any summary you would like to give of the first 4 centuries? And then we'll do some question and answer.
To summarize that first 4 centuries, I would say, though we don't have much of the practical evidences other than the writings of some of the church fathers and indications of the early trade routes and economic growth and other connections with the people of the Middle East and the Indian Peninsula, we believe that with the evidence of, or probably with the experience and with our own personal histories and the history that cherishes our own culture and our life in India, we believe that this tradition is a living tradition in India. It is not a dead tradition. It is not an all of a sudden, the Syriac tradition is not an invented tradition. So we have a solid belief that Thomas the Apostle came to India, and he preached good news to us, and he has given us the good news to all of us. And then thereafter, we expanded our Christian nature along with the traditions available through the trade routes and other ecclesial hierarchies. And we grew in India. And at the same time, we had a lot of downfall due to geographical areas and even due to various other reasons. At those point in time, though we were less in number, we connected back to the Christendom. And some of the hierarchs in the Middle East, particularly people in Antioch, and then we raised, or maybe we got back some of the results from them, and that is what we learn from the next part of the history, the Syrian migration, where they came to India either through because of their reasons, political reasons, or with our demand. They came, and then we expanded a bit more solidly in Indian context. So that is what the nutshell of Indian Christianity at the early period. But I don't want to just simply negate, like some of the Western authors or Christian critics. Just there is no evidence and there is no Christianity in India. No, there is a living tradition, and that tradition follow the Orthodox faith, and they had the knowledge of Trinity. They had the knowledge of Christology, who was Christ, and they negated Gnosticism, and they negated many of the heretical teachings. And we had very close contact with the wider, Christian world, and we used to have people, definitely the hierarchs, coming to our place and also helping us in terms of the worship, faith, and ecclesial hierarchies. And we were always part of the church that was very much founded in Antioch, as I said, and had our greater relations. So therefore, it is a living tradition. It's not a dead tradition. It's a living tradition.
Well, thank you, Father. I also want to thank someone else, who is Zebi, who hooked us up. So a long-awaited interview is finally a glory to Christ. And yes, to God be the glory. And he was the one who set this all up. So I just want to give special thanks to Zebi. We have a question here, and I'm just scrolling down. I'm not a tech expert. Wish I was. So here we go. This is from a Greek Orthodox Christian. He says, when the church grew and started to engage the ancient Greek world, the knowledge the fathers had of Greek thought helped the church evangelize the pagan Greeks. What are some historical cultural aspects of Indian life/tradition/thought that the Orthodox needs to understand before they start missions in India? So I think his question was, when they evangelized the Greeks, they had some knowledge of Greek paganism and Greek customs. What, let's say, did St. Thomas and follow-up Christian evangelists when they went to India, what did they know about India that helped convert Indians to Christianity?
Probably in my reading and also in my research, the Indian Christianity and Indian Orthodox Christianity or Syriac Christianity, these are all different names, but it all comes to one point. Is very unique in the sense that Indian Christianity never had a hostile mind to the cultures and the life which was already there in the land. And therefore, I believe the orthodoxy in India was much more broader in the outlook of taking the cultural aspect of this particular Indian cultural aspects, and even some of the other philosophical aspects, and try to understand how Christian theology is something which is relevant with that lens. And therefore, I believe India has something to contribute to the entire Orthodox world in such a way that we have, though we were less in number, and we are less in number, but we have a solid history of orthodoxy in terms of professing its true nature, but at the same time, becoming more amalgamated with the culture of the land. But there is at the same time there is a hitch. There is a kind of a trap, because we followed some of the cultural aspect. We try to forget the culture culture in its entirety. We just followed a top classic culture, as we said, but we have millions of people in our country. They do have their own cultural and indigenous form of thoughts and life, which we have not taken seriously. In fact, my whole of research, even for my PhD, was on that particular topic, how the indigenous culture and their philosophy and their life was was not taken seriously by the Orthodox Christianity in India. But there are cultural reasons, there are economic reasons, political reasons. But I would always say India always contributes to the other orthodoxy around the world. And also we take, and it's a giving and taking method. And we don't, and this is what another critique that I always make in Indian Christianity. We should not just simply say that we are something separate. We are part of the entire orthodoxy. And we have taken so many things from outside, even from the Greek church. If you look at the early authentic doctrines, we have a lot of borrowing done from the Greek church, Alexandrian church, and other churches. But Indian Christianity, at the same time, much owed to the. I mean, this is probably you might interpret in different ways, but historically it proves that we have a lot taken from the Antiochian Church, which was not only hierarchically but liturgically, and even its cultural approach of the orthodoxy. And also we try to assimilate all these insights from all other Christian traditions, and that's a greatness that we receive in India. And also we are thankful to all other Christian traditions, particularly the Orthodox Christian traditions outside. They were always approachable to us, though there were differences. But then, if you look at history, we don't have any direct clash between with the Byzantine Church or maybe the Oriental Church in India. We do not take up those issues historically for the past 20 centuries, but we have taken a culture which we have taken and we put forward to the world, and that is what Indian Christianity and Orthodox Christianity in India.
Now, today, how many millions of Orthodox Christians are there in India? Around 3 million, 4 million. What about the number?
It's a very, very interesting question, and I believe that we have 1.5 million as the Jacobites. The other same with the other faction, and Marthomites, they have 1 million, and that's what they claim. And the Catholic 500,000, the Orthodox traditions, and all others again they have another million. So adding many millions, probably more than 3 or 4, but it's not accurate. It's from the church's directory, but state directory is something different. I hope, but a considerable number of Orthodox Christianity is still alive in India, and it's a great story that most of the time the Western critics have given a bad shape, bad nature curtain, or maybe a black story for us, but that is not the story in India. The Indian Orthodox Christianity is always an ever-shining and growing Christianity, and we always cherish our experiences, a living tradition, starting from Apostles Thomas. And then we are so happy and humbled enough to connect with other traditions outside. And we do have our people and our hierarchs, they connect to our counterparts, the Byzantine traditions, Eastern Orthodox churches, Russian Church, Greek Church, and many other churches, and also with the other Oriental churches.
It's but by Indian standards, it's a small number. But by it's when you talk about 1.5 million plus another million plus another half, which are really once all part of the same thing, that's like the country of Georgia almost.
Right.
So it's it's small by Indian standards, but India has more people than all of Europe. So just to put things into perspective, we have a comment here which asks a rhetorical question, but I want to spin it into a question. And he says, don't these Far East churches refute the Protestant thesis that St. Constantine created new Christianity? I mean, they venerate saints and the Holy Mother just like us. And I'm sure Father Jacob would be, well, no, you venerate the saints and the Holy Mother like we do, right? So it's the other way around. But my question would be this, based on that comment. To what degree do you think there is significant continuity with the practices, ecclesiology, the piety in India? And what do you think would be the significant discontinuity, where we shouldn't stereotype that the way Christianity is practiced in India is going to be just the same as it is in Greece or in Italy or something like that? So what are the main things that show continuity in your opinion, the main things that maybe show discontinuity?
Your question is more about the continuity, or is that
whichever. Like, I mean, in your mind, is it like, are you like 95% the same? Like, if you went from Kerala, I'm just going to make it up, and then you went to Amman, Jordan, is what you're going to see there pretty much 95% the same, and the 5% difference going to be cultural stuff, maybe language stuff, or in the food, or is there a more significant difference that people are not appreciating?
In my view, the Syrian Christians, we have a common approach and commonality in many things. We do uphold probably a kind of 80 to 90% of the same wherever we go and whatever we do, and this has got a connection not only to our cultural milieu, rather our own linguistic, our ecclesial and even theological reasons. So the Syrian Christians, wherever they move, and whatever the theology that they practice, or whatever the life they practice, this is connected with not only the culture, but even their ecclesial and festival backgrounds, and even the linguistic, and even the Syriac theological, and even the Orthodox faith in general. So it is not much different. If you see someone there in New York or in Australia, you don't see much difference. And you will go to if you go to any church in New York, a Syrian church, particularly the Indian race, and you come here if you come down to Australia, or even in some other part of Europe or wherever, it's a kind of a same, and that the other Christianity, particularly the Protestant Christian traditions, could not give much change in that area to the Orthodox Christians. In that sense, they are too Orthodox.
Now, do you like the scene better in Texas or Australia, or no comment? Because you've been in both places.
Yeah. So see, the one and the same.
Ones are just as good in both. We have a question here, which is: has there been any impact of Islam in Kerala? And I know it's far away from Pakistan, but was with the Mughals or anything, was that ever a thing in Kerala? Did Islam ever have any sort of influence or pose any problems?
See, when you look at Islam and the Syriac Orthodox Church, both has got its one common point, is that both the religions have come from outside to India. So India received both the churches, and then in India we don't have many fights or maybe many issues as such. But on the other hand, when I go to the Syriac Orthodox churches here, or in any parts of other Western, geography, people ask me, "Do you live together, or maybe you have a good relation in India? Do you think that Islam and in Christians are going hand in hand?" And for me, we have never experienced those kind of historical experiences. The reason is, see, I live. I was born and brought up in Kerala, in one of the towns which is called Pathanamthitta, where I studied in a college where we have Hindus, Muslims, and in the caste hierarchy, top, bottom. But we never had. I've got friends from all the religions, and we never had any issues as such in India so far. And thank God that everything is going well as far as the religion between Hindus and Christians are concerned, in a general sense. Even for Hinduism, we do have problems with other religions in India. with regard to our, the aggressive Christian conversion and its movements. But other than that, we don't have major issues. But the issues are different in terms of fundamentalism. If you look at the Hindu fundamentalism, this is a different issue to be talked. That has nothing to do with uh, the early Christianity and Hinduism. And even there are some critics. They say that the early Christian community in India and the other communities, religious communities, they go hand in hand. But the Western Christianity, or maybe the missionary Christianity, has got issues. There are some truth in it, and some fundamentalist communities, they don't accept Christianity as one in India, and we do have that problem. And we sometimes take the privilege of being the oldest, and that's also not true, because that's not right, because Christianity to be seen as one, and therefore we need to have some critics. And I said at the very beginning, I'm not looking at this show as something critic to any religions or our own movements, but per se, we have, in general, looking at the population in India and looking at the social and political structure in India, we do go hand in hand in many cases, but we have see in outside we do have some problems, but Islam and Christianity mostly go hand in hand in India.
Now, we have a question that is really for me, unless Father Jacob has the answer, but I'm just going to answer really quick. When's the stream about Ethiopia going to be? And I believe it's March 6th. It's on the, you can look at the channel. I have future shows. I'm looking forward to penciling part 2 to get to the medieval era, Father Jacob. We have this question, which is, are there any ancient Indian non-Christian historians that mention Christianity? So do we have any contemporary histories in India, or have those been lost, like written documents?
Oh, there are lots of historians. They have discussed, and also they have written so much about it. So if you this is one of the books I have. This is in Malayalam, which is written as the history of Kerala. It is written by Sridhara Menon, is a very well-known writer and a critic. He practices Hinduism, and the other one is Jadi Vyavasthidiyam Kerala Charitram, which is about casteism and Kerala history. In all histories, we find Syrian Christians, which is written by Balakrishnan. So I think these are only 2 books, and there are n number of large volume of books written by many people from 19th century on. So it's not a new edition. So there are for and against, but mostly these histories are common, and many of them, keep their standard of understanding how ancient Christianity is alive in India. However, I would say all the critics, mainly when you look at the Indian Christianity and its critics, are mostly raised from the Western Christianity. They, particularly the past 2 centuries, they think that this is a story. It is just a story. The story of Thomas is just a story. But in my personal view, even if in a critical approach, I would always say some of the stories attached to Saint Thomas is more imaginary. But whatever be the imaginary stories, the traits of the early Christianity in India, and the possibility of Saint Thomas, who's preaching to India and whose gospel to India is not a just story. This is what my readings states, and the earliest Christianity and the Orthodox Christianity and the Orthodox theology is much prevalent in the Indian story. I would just probably I add one more sentence with regard to that particular area. In maybe 5 to 6 decades ago, we had one book called, I had that copy, the book's name is Indian Christian Theology. So in that particular book, Indian Christian Theology, the author starts saying, the very first part of that book, the author says, Indian Christianity begins, or ever shining and ever burning light is nothing or not from any other historical point, but from the ancient St. Thomas Christian story. And he gives some of the authors at that point, and even also that is a Protestant writer is from. And then he gives an example saying the story of Saint Severus of Antioch, and how his theology is much more stronger in Indian context and Indian Orthodoxy. So my point is, most of the Indian writers, they give credits to the Indian Christianity and don't discredit the available history and the stories connected to the hymn, within the hymns and the folk songs and other things up to 4th century. Definitely after 4th century we have very solid historical references, but some of the scholars from outside India, they don't believe, and they don't want to believe that there is an ancient Christianity in India. But we do have this Christian life, alive and a living Christianity that is there in India.
Now, let me ask one final question from the audience. And granted, India's got more people than Europe, so in the religious landscape, the whole country is incredibly diverse. So I'm going to presume you're not an expert in every little thing in India, just like someone in Spain is an expert what's going on in Belarus. But let me ask you this then. Broadly speaking, what is the biggest obstacle to preaching the gospel throughout India? That, why can't, let's say, the Keralans make more converts within Kerala, outside of Kerala? What's the landscape in India that creates an obstacle for people to become Christians generally, that it's such a majority Hindu nation?
This question is an old question, not to me, but even during the time of missionaries, the same questions repeated by many people. Even Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi once said, I love Christ, but not Christians. Maybe at the outset, I just wish to give a broad answer that even Christianity became a more hybrid in its content. The life of Christians and per se Christianity itself is deteriorating its orthodoxy. I would say its life. The life of Christianity is becoming much more, it's watering down in India. And therefore the witness as such by Christians. So I'm a missiologist, mission theologian. So I would say the essence of Christianity is being lost on the way, and even because of various misfit approach of our public face in past maybe 100 years, we could not continue our message to the entire world, particularly India. Secondly, the overemphasis of conversion rather than passing the message. That has made a bad impact to Indian context. I hope you understood what's the difference between these two. So instead of preaching about Christ, we thought we would add number in Christianity. And then the issue was which group? Is it to the modern Protestant group, or maybe the Catholic group, or the Orthodox group? So there is no consensus in that particular area, because preaching the gospel is different and making people more in number in our churches is different. So we never could come to a consensus. Christianity could never come to a consensus in that area. And therefore, what happened in the political scenario of Christianity today, even today, the people of other religions, they believe that the root of Christianity is more into conversion rather than preaching gospel. So that makes us suspicious. So our community is always under suspicion that the moment we talk about Christianity, the moment you speak about the good news about Jesus Christ, our, our, our final goal is to just bring in all people into Christianity. I think that has given a very wrong notion. People coming to Christianity or maybe embracing Christianity is the work of Holy Spirit, not our work. It's the work of Holy Spirit. And if somebody wants to embrace Christ, and that definitely be there. But as a Christian community, as an Orthodox community, our job, our responsibility is to highlight the good news to the world, to Christ. And I think in that part, we have failed, considerably we have failed to put up our manifesto saying that we speak about Christ and we do what Christ has done. We are going to be living gospels, which we failed mostly, considerably. I'm not saying that we have not done. We have done so much. We have done through various social involvements, spiritual involvements. But I believe we have not communicated this gospelizing, evangelizing in a better way. But the world of Indian community has seen our gospelizing as a part of bringing or maybe converting the whole country into Christianity. But that's not true. That is not the agenda of Christianity at all. But however, we were misunderstood because of the fact that some of the Christian groups have got agenda of what I've said earlier.
Yeah, it really depends upon the grace of God, because right, you could take a country that had no Christianity whatsoever, take Korea, and then after the Korean War, I'm just going to make up a number that's roughly close. 25% essentially becomes Presbyterian, right? 25% of a country that wasn't Christian became Christian. You think, well, India has this head start. They got 2,000 years of Christianity, right? At least if you were to become Christian, like if I were in a different part of India, I'd want to be part of the Indian Orthodox Church because, right, it's Indian. But it's, like I said, I think to some degree, because the sheer diversity of India, and I see Zebby was alluding to how Kerala is like known to be tolerant, that it kind of upsets the apple cart. And it's probably a careful balance in all these different areas, different linguistic groups and whatnot, to then all start changing people's religion and it's seen as subversive. And so I would imagine that's something part of the Indian experience, which people don't appreciate because the country is so diverse. It's because it's got these national borders. Doesn't mean people from this end to that end of India look anywhere alike. I remember I was in church. I don't know. I was with my wife 10 years ago or something. And there was I was in a Presbyterian church and there was an Indian pastor. And when people say Indian, they think of someone who's dark skinned. The guy looked Chinese because people afraid there's a part of India that's pretty much right next to China. It's like pretty much in between the Himalayan mountains. So I'm not an ethnic expert, whether they're technically Tibetan or whatnot, but it's part of India is the point. And so India is just incredibly diverse. And, it's the Holy Spirit could convert 25% of India in the next 50 years to Christianity. There's nothing impossible with God. God has done things like this, but India poses very specific challenges due to its diversity. And that's as little as I know and as much as I could say, right? Personally, what would work in, I suppose, one part of India wouldn't work in the next. Probably the only thing everyone has in common is they all like the movies with the dancing. And the same. Maybe they can figure out the way to put the gospel in that, because the Bollywood movies, by the way, were even big in Cambodia because Cambodia doesn't have much of their own entertainment. So they translate into Khmer. You're watching Indian movies in Cambodia. So I'm sure the same movies are big everywhere in India. If they're leaving the country and they're big there too. Father Jacob, let me give you an opportunity to tell viewers where they could read up on some things you've written, learn more from you, from other talks you've given, essentially give us your plugs.
With regard to my own research, as I think I've already mentioned, my interest is all about patristic theology, patristic mission theology, and contextual theology, and finally Indian Christian theology and history. So some of the articles I have already uploaded in academia. You can find my name in academia, and you will just get some of those articles. And some of them are published in various journals, which I can just pass it on to you, those details later. And my book, one of the books is coming up soon. I'm in contract with one of the publishers, and that is coming up soon. And I'm also writing 2 books now. I mean, that's a part of my my present academic responsibility. One is I'm writing a theology of mission, Orthodox mission theology, both Eastern Orthodox and the Byzantine Orthodox tradition. So I taught one unit last time, which was basically a custom-made unit, which was connecting to the entire theology of Orthodox mission. So that is coming up. That is I'm just part of writing now. And then the second one is the history of Orthodox mission. So that's also, and I'm not segregating both the Oriental or the Byzantine or Eastern Orthodox. I'm just getting an Orthodox, a kind of a book which can give you an idea about what is Orthodox mission from the beginning until the end, a kind of an overview. And theology, basically, I just go through the doctrines and even the contemporary issues. How do the Orthodox theology of mission is responding to those areas? But my book, the very immediate one, is more about the possibility. This is a methodological book, which I'm trying to argue how to read early church fathers in the modern times, with 2 examples. I'm taking one of the early church fathers, Severus of Antioch, and I'm reading a context of Indian marginal community that we were talking about. So people at the margin in the caste bottom, caste ladder. And then I'm trying to read how these 2 things will be a fascinating reading for the Orthodox Christians. So taking the patristic literature, reading and life seriously, and at the same time, the context in which we live. How do we go along with these 2 things? And I set a methodology. I hope you are aware with Father George Florowski's the main dictum, neo-patristic synthesis. This is a theological term. I'm trying to go beyond in today's context. I mean, I'm taking that as seriously. What is George Florowski? He's a Russian father, and then bringing a new light to go beyond in today's context. So this is
a neo-patristic synthesis.
Neo-patristic synthesis. Yeah. So I think this is the book that is coming up, and then other 2 books are on the line, and a few articles. So you can find whatever the published one. I mean, half of the published one is there in academia, and some of them I'll be uploading soon. And you can expect my book maybe 2021 itself. I'm hoping and praying. And 22 project is the 2 books. One is Orthodox Mission Theology and History of Orthodox Mission. Yep.
Please let me, for whatever articles that you think you'd want people to read, you could send those to me, and I'd put them in the description and all, or a sticky or something, so when they watch this video, people have access to it. But also, I'm going to give a quick plug, because but before I do that, I want to say, when the book on missionary work and theology comes out that you have, please let me know, because pretty much the whole point of this show, what I do is I raise money for the church in Cambodia. Now, they're Eastern Orthodox, they're Moscow Patriarchate. But if this show has blessed you and you're Eastern Orthodox, if you're Oriental Orthodox, I presume this would be the wrong thing for you to do. But if you're Eastern Orthodox, if you go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate, there's instructions to how you can send money to the churches, the Moscow Patriarchate in Cambodia. They have 3 parishes. And I keep begging Father Paisi, because he's the one who speaks English, like, tell people what's going on there. And he's really coy. But Cambodia has its own interesting challenges for missionary work. But I would say this, the thing that's most common there, because they don't have any really historic Christianity like India, but also Cambodia's not as diverse internally as India is. You know, they have some like indigenous people, but it's mostly Cambodians are the same. They all speak Khmer. And they're all entirely Buddhist, like 97%. And so really the most successful way for missionary work to occur in Cambodia is schools, because people want education and they largely want to learn Western languages, particularly English. But, you know, for example, they still want to learn French, anywhere that may help their children get better educations and scholarships to Western schools, or Japanese, for example, Korean, anywhere outside of Cambodia. It's pretty much what they're motivated by. But here's the relevance to us as Christians would be, well, here's an opportunity where if we can help build up parishes, they could open up schools, and that could bring in people that aren't believers, and then that's how they become Christians. They're educated into the faith. This is something that Roman Catholics have done, for example, throughout the world in order to convert people, particular success, for example, in the Philippines. Depending on your view of success, Uniate movements, let's say in Syria and Lebanon, through schools. So they're not building any schools in Cambodia now. That's kind of like my pipe dream. Somewhere down the line, they'll do that. But every little bit helps. And for these parishes here, they do stuff as much like buy tons of bags of rice and then give it to the Cambodian Red Cross. So at least it puts a good public face on what Christians doing. They love their neighbor, and it's especially important to love all, but especially those in the household of God. So if this has blessed you, you don't have to give money to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Just bless someone else, whether it's your local monastery, whether there is some opportunity you have to give alms to someone who needs it. Bless someone else. God will bless you. Probably not financially, but God will draw you closer to him, right? This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. But God will sanctify you, and one of the way you can do that is with almsgiving. Here's just one small way would be with helping the churches in Cambodia, but help them anywhere where it's relevant to you and what communion you're in. So pretty much
I really wish to have more knowledge about the Cambodian Orthodoxy, because I can just add into I'm teaching one unit this time. I can add some of the stories into my course so that my students will get to know about Cambodian mission.
If you go to that link, I tell you everything I know, which isn't much, but I can get you into contact with Father Roman or Father Paisi.
Thank you so much.
And they could fill you in. But Father Jacob, it's been an immense honor having you today. It's been a real blessing to start really getting into this issue, and God willing, we'll be able to do this again soon.
No, thank you so much. Thank you, Craig. This is another opportunity for me also to express my thanks to one and all for gathering together to listen to the stories from India. It's always good to know that our common interests are heard, particularly from the Orthodox point of view. I think it is not much heard around the world. And also, even if we have heard something which is not in the right light, therefore I believe that it is the right time for us to bring together our experiences, our lives, and our people, and also our future endeavors, so that we will have more to do together. And thank you for your ministry through this great opportunity of conversing with people. And I'm also thankful to you and all the audience. And also I'm thankful to Sebi, who introduced you to me. And we'll see how best we can continue our conversations. Thank you so much. Thank you, one and all. Thank you for listening almost 2 hours.
No,
Yeah.
it's been the pleasure of everyone here and myself. I'll sign off from the show as I sign off all of them, quoting Jesus Sirach, who says, "Fight the death for the truth, and the Lord God will fight for you." God bless you all. Have a good day.
God bless you. Thank you. Thank you so much.